Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Ronald Marks. I'm 40 years old, and if you told me 10 years ago that my father would try to erase me in front of hundreds of people, I might have laughed. But betrayal has a way of sharpening your reality, and mine came in a banquet hall packed with champagne, applause, and poison. It was my father's retirement party. Gerald Marks, founder and longtime CEO of Titan Equity Global, was stepping down after 42 years at the helm of one of the most ruthless investment firms in New York. The event was held at the Rosegate Hotel ballroom, decked in gold and cream, a space filled with whispers, crystal glass, and men in $1,000 suits pretending they had hearts. I hadn't seen my father in almost 5 years, not since he told me, in no uncertain terms, that I was a disgrace to the family name. You see, I didn't go into finance like my older brothers, Jonathan and Theo. I didn't crush others to rise to the top. I joined the army. Served my country. Found my honor in the mud, not the markets. But that night, I showed up. Not to gloat. Not even to forgive. Just, to close a chapter. My wife, Layla, had encouraged me to go. He may never give you approval, Ron, she had said, but sometimes the silence you carry is louder than the insults. And she was right. I arrived in a modest navy suit, nothing flashy. No military medals. Just a West Point pin on my lapel, a whisper of who I really was. I stayed to the side. I didn't need attention. But it found me anyway. My father took the stage to a standing ovation. He talked about building an empire, thanked his colleagues and clients, and finally, began to mention his children. To my firstborn, Jonathan, he said, raising his glass, whose boldness will carry our name to even greater heights. To Theo, my second, whose intuition in mergers is unmatched. He paused. Then, with that cold smile I knew too well, he turned toward me. And Ronald, he said, drawing out my name like it left a bitter taste. My youngest. Who chose a different path. A soldier. A man who ran from real responsibility to play war in the dirt. Laughter erupted from some tables. I suppose every family has a black sheep, he added, his voice sharp enough to slice through the music. Maybe he'll salute us on his way out. I stood there, my ears ringing. My fists clenched. I could hear Jonathan chuckling. Theo looking smug. I hadn't come here to be praised, but I hadn't expected to be gutted in public. I turned to leave. Then a voice, deep and calm, echoed from behind the stage. Excuse me. Did you say Ronald Marks? I turned. So did half the room. A tall man with graying temples and a navy blue blazer stood up. It was Thomas Beringer, chairman of Titan Equity, the man who had hired my father all those decades ago. I didn't recognize you at first, Beringer said, walking toward me. You're Colonel Ronald Marks, aren't you? The one who coordinated Operation Iron Shield in Eastern Europe? Silence. My father's smile dropped like glass shattering on marble. I took a slow breath and nodded. Yes, sir. That's me. You saved our overseas division from a catastrophic cyber attack last year, Beringer continued, placing a hand on my shoulder. Our analysts said your counter-operation saved billions. I've read every report on you. A brilliant strategist. A national hero. The entire room shifted. Eyes widened. My brothers froze. I didn't know, my father stammered. I'm not surprised, Beringer cut in. You wouldn't. Men like you never recognize greatness unless it wears a suit and steps on someone to get there. And just like that, the tide turned. But this story doesn't start here. It started long before that room. Before the applause. Before the silence broke. It started with a father who never wanted a son, only successors. Growing up in the Marx household felt like living in the lobby of a Wall Street skyscraper, marble floors, polished silverware, glass so clean it looked invisible. But behind the gleam was something colder than money. My father, Gerald Marx, didn't raise sons. He groomed heirs. Everything in our lives was a transaction. Praise had a price. Love came with conditions. Jonathan and Theo learned early. They talked returns and portfolios at the dinner table when they were still in braces. They played squash with our father on weekends and sat beside him at board meetings like junior apprentices. I, on the other hand, was the anomaly. I liked history. Maps. Stories of courage and sacrifice. While my brothers read Forbes, I read The Art of War. While they bragged about internships, I memorized military ranks and studied famous battles. By the time I was 16, I knew I wanted to go to West Point. My mother, bless her heart, was the only one who didn't laugh. She died of ovarian cancer a year later. I remember her final words to me, whispered in a hospital bed that smelled of antiseptic and fading lavender perfume. "Ronnie," she said, her voice like wine through dry leaves, "don't live to impress men who can't love. Live to protect those who can." I held her hand as she passed. I've never let go of that memory. After her death, the house felt darker. Colder. My father became a man made entirely of shadow and ambition. I told him I'd applied to West Point. He didn't even look up from his desk. "You'll embarrass this family," he muttered. "That's not a career, it's a suicide mission in camo." He didn't speak to me again for 2 weeks. I got in. I packed my bags alone. Jonathan called me a fool. Theo told me I'd be back in 6 months, begging for a desk job at Titan Equity. I left anyway. And for a time, I soared. West Point tested every limit I had. It broke me down, piece by piece, and rebuilt me into something new. Stronger. Sharper. Not just physically, but mentally. I found a purpose beyond profit. I learned what leadership really meant. I graduated near the top of my class. Got deployed twice. Eventually, I earned my first medal for leading a rescue op that saved a dozen civilians in Kandahar. I mailed the citation to my father. He sent it back. Ripped in half. It was like being disowned all over again. The thing is, when people talk about service and sacrifice, they don't always mention the loneliness. It isn't just the gunfire, or the months away from home. It's the silence from those who should care. The birthdays missed. The letters never returned. The pride that should have been yours to share, sitting like a lead weight in your chest instead. When I made lieutenant colonel, I held the rank pin in my palm and stared at it for a long time. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized no one in my family would ever pin it to my chest. Even my wedding felt like a quiet rebellion. Layla and I got married in a small ceremony in Colorado Springs. She was a nurse I met on deployment. Fierce. Brilliant. Gentle with my scars but tough when I tried to hide behind them. She asked, "Should we invite your family?" I laughed. They'd rather toast a tax audit than come see me in uniform. We didn't send invitations. The years rolled on. I led operations, thwarted cyber threats, rose through the ranks. I became the guy who showed up when other plans failed. But every time I achieved something new, the absence of recognition from my father was a wound that never fully closed. Even when I was promoted to colonel after Operation Iron Shield, a coordinated effort to prevent a cyber collapse of half a dozen European stock markets, there was no call, no email, no acknowledgement from the man who used to say the Marx name stood for leadership. I had saved his company. He didn't even know. Or worse, he didn't care. The only family member who ever reached out was Aunt Melissa, my mother's younger sister. She sent postcards, sometimes birthday cards, always signed, "Your mother would be proud." So am I. That meant more than she'll ever know. And yet, even with all I had built, my marriage, my rank, my purpose, there was a quiet grief that never left me. It sat in the background like an unfinished sentence. A part of me still wanted to be seen by the man who had always looked right through me. Then came the retirement invitation. Black embossed letters. A gold seal. Addressed to Mr. Ronald Marks. No rank. No title. Just a name he barely acknowledged. Layla found it first. She placed it on the counter and said nothing. Later, she asked, "You going?" I hesitated. Why would I? She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Because you deserve to walk into that room and know the truth, that you already won." I didn't answer. That night, I stared at my uniform. And I knew. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about closure. There's a saying in the army, the enemy you don't see is the one that breaks your back. I learned that lesson the hard way, but not on a battlefield. It happened behind a desk, in a classified cyber warfare unit buried beneath the Pentagon. No gunfire. No explosions. Just silent code, lines of it, like veins of poison running through a system designed to keep America's financial arteries pumping. Operation Iron Shield wasn't supposed to involve Titan Equity. The initial intel pointed to a planned cyber attack targeting international wire systems used by multiple major banks across Europe. But once we began dissecting the malware patterns, I saw something familiar, too familiar. A third-party vendor used by the attackers matched one I'd seen on my father's corporate security disclosures years ago, Titan Equity's European branch. I froze. At first, I thought it was coincidence. But when we traced the breach attempt to a Swiss-based subsidiary registered under a shell company, the picture became clearer. Titan Equity wasn't the target, it was the entry point. My father's empire, the fortress he bragged about for decades, was one step from collapse, and he didn't even know it. I'll never forget the moment I realized what was at stake. We were 48 hours out from a potential full-blown financial cascade. The malware had already entered the authentication servers through an outdated firewall. If activated, it would have triggered a false liquidity report to several central banks, crashing stocks overnight and sending billions into the abyss. Titan Equity would have been blamed for negligence. Lawsuits. Criminal probes. Their brand would have disintegrated. I gathered my team and said, "We're sealing this breach without media, without noise. Quiet justice." They didn't question it. We worked for 36 hours straight. My lead tech, Alvarez, nearly passed out at his terminal. But we found the backdoor, shut down the breach, and fed the attackers a sandbox loop to monitor their next move. When the dust cleared, we had done the impossible, prevented a cyber 9/11 for global finance. And no one at Titan Equity ever knew. But I did. And so did the Pentagon. A week later, I was summoned to a secure room. Waiting there was a man I'd only heard about, Thomas Beringer, the elusive founder and chairman of Titan Equity. The same man who would later recognize me at my father's retirement party. He was older than I expected. Slender frame. Crisp charcoal suit. Eyes like ice melting slowly. "Colonel Marks," he said, extending a hand. "I understand we owe you a debt we can never repay." I shook his hand, stunned. "You're with Titan Equity," I said, trying not to betray my surprise. He nodded. "I founded it. Stepped back years ago. But when whispers of foreign compromise reached me, I started pulling threads. Every thread led to you. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt hollow. I could save the company that treated me like dirt. But I couldn't make my father care. Beringer asked me something then that would stick with me for months. "Why didn't you notify our executive office?" I laughed, bitterly. "Because the man in that office is my father." He blinked, stunned. "Gerald Marks is your father?" "Unfortunately." Beringer went quiet for a long time. Then, with a sharp breath, he said, "He never mentioned having a son in uniform." "Sounds about right." He sighed and added something else. "Gerald was always talented with numbers. But blind when it came to people." He handed me his card. "If you ever need anything, you come to me." Not him. I never used that card. Not until the night of the retirement party. On the flight to New York for that event, I stared out the window, wrestling with the question that haunted me. Why save someone who never cared if you drowned? But Layla's words echoed in my head, "You don't need his apology to close the door. You just need to stop knocking." She was right. I didn't need vengeance. Not yet. But I was starting to realize, I did have something he couldn't buy. Power. The quiet kind. The kind that didn't need applause. The kind that could destroy or save an empire, with one whisper to the right person. And deep down, part of me knew, if my father ever dared to spit on my name again, I wouldn't walk away this time. I'd burn the illusion to the ground. Something snapped inside me the moment Thomas Beringer stood at my father's retirement party and said my name. Not in anger. In clarity. For years, I thought walking away was strength. That rising above the insults made me the better man. But standing there, watching my father pale in front of 300 of his peers, stunned that the disappointment's son was now being applauded by the very man who created Titan Equity, I realized something else. Sometimes silence isn't grace. Sometimes it's surrender. And I wasn't done fighting. Because while my father mocked me in tailored suits, while my brothers basked in inherited praise, I was out there in deserts and concrete bunkers, protecting the very system they worshipped. And when that system nearly collapsed, I was the one who held the line. They'd forgotten me. But now, they would remember. After the party, I didn't go back to Colorado Springs right away. I stayed in New York. Rented a small suite downtown. Layla understood immediately. "You're not just trying to move on anymore, are you?" she asked over the phone. "No," I said quietly. "I'm moving through." She didn't ask for details. Just said, "Then do it with precision." Not anger. That's the difference between vengeance and justice. One feeds your ego, the other buries it in facts. I spent 2 weeks combing public and private records on Titan Equity. I had access to federal filings, offshore subsidiary reports, security clearances from past cyber briefings, and I knew how to find buried truth in spreadsheets the way soldiers read enemy terrain. That's when I discovered something even I hadn't expected. Titan Equity was sitting on a fraud bomb. The Swiss subsidiary that was almost breached during Operation Iron Shield. It hadn't been fully secured. Gerald and my brothers had quietly reopened operations there just 3 months ago, replacing the firewall vendor to cut costs. I reviewed the contract. They had knowingly installed a cheaper security system, after we proved it had been a previous access point for hackers. And worst of all, they were using false compliance reports to keep European regulators at bay. If that ever came out, Titan Equity would implode. Their stock would nosedive. Investors would flee. The board would demand heads on pikes. Including my father's. I stared at those documents for hours. Not because I doubted what I'd found, but because it gave me something I didn't expect. Leverage. But I didn't want to destroy Titan Equity just to watch it burn. I wanted my father to stand in the same shame he'd thrown at me for decades. I wanted him to know I held his legacy in the palm of my hand. So I made a plan. And I wasn't going to do it alone. First, I reached out to Thomas Beringer. I met him at his private club on the Upper East Side, wood-paneled walls, leather chairs, a world where deals are made with handshakes and whispered threats. He looked up as I entered. "Ronald. I was hoping you'd call. I didn't waste time. I have proof Gerald is running false security filings through a Swiss front." He blinked. Just once. Then leaned forward. You're sure? I slid the flash drive across the table. If this gets out, Titan Equity collapses. But I don't want collapse. I want accountability. He studied me carefully. You're not here to sink him. No. I want him to see exactly what I've become. And who he's not. He nodded slowly. Then I'll help. But you need more than documents. You need a moment. Something public. Something unforgettable. I already had one in mind. Titan Equity was hosting its Global Innovation Summit in 4 weeks. A high-profile event with investors, media, and industry leaders, all under one roof. And guess who was scheduled to deliver the keynote? My father. I made 2 calls that afternoon. One to the Department of Defense liaison, asking to formally declassify a limited version of Operation Iron Shield for a civilian cybersecurity presentation. 2, the other, to a friend at Bloomberg News who owed me a favor. The plan was simple. Let the world see my work, not his wealth. Let the media ask questions he couldn't answer. And let him watch, powerless, as his legacy shifted into my hands, without me ever lifting a single weapon. Just truth. And timing. On the day of the summit, I didn't wear a uniform. I wore a crisp gray suit. No medals. Just that same West Point pin. I walked through the convention center like I belonged, because now, I did. Beringer had pulled strings. I wasn't just an invited guest. I was now an opening speaker on cyber warfare in global markets. Scheduled 30 minutes before my father's keynote. When he saw my name on the screen, I watched him freeze. For the first time, he looked scared. And it was just the beginning. The moment my name appeared on the event's digital screen, Ronald Marks, U.S. Army Colonel, RET, Strategic Cybersecurity Advisor to the DoD, you could feel the room shift. The chatter dipped. Heads turned. But none more sharply than my father's. I caught his eyes across the room. And for the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. My father, the man who used to speak in final judgments, who declared me a failure at 15 and ignored every success since, stood in the center of Titan Equity's most prestigious event, watching as his invisible son was now the face of national protection. I walked up to the stage to light applause, modest, respectful. Then I began to speak. Not with ego. Not with vengeance. But with clarity. In 2021, an unidentified foreign entity attempted to penetrate European financial systems using a US-linked software partner as the attack's entry point. What many don't know is, that company is based in this room today. You could hear the silence tighten like a noose. I clicked the remote. The presentation shifted, Operation Iron Shield. Classified redacted files. Attack vectors. Source code maps. No names were shown. No corporate logos. Just the truth, packaged in data. Had we failed, I continued, financial markets would have plummeted. Trillions in losses. Chaos. But we didn't fail. And that's why I'm standing here. Eyes flicked to my father. Murmurs began, low, confused, sharp. He sat in the front row, flanked by Jonathan and Theo. Both now sweating under the lights. Then I dropped the bomb. When this happened, the executives responsible had no idea their systems were compromised. That failure in leadership nearly cost this country dearly. But it wasn't the analysts, the techs, or the junior officers who missed it. It was the men at the top, who stopped listening to anyone that didn't fit their vision of success. I let that hang. Sometimes, protecting a system means telling the truth no one wants to hear. Even if it's to your own father. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's eyes locked with mine. He wasn't smirking now. I closed the speech with the same restraint I'd always practiced in battle, leave no trace. Leave no blood. But make sure they remember. Your security doesn't come from your title. It comes from the people you ignore. I stepped off the stage. No applause this time. Just stunned silence. And that was louder than any standing ovation. I didn't watch my father's keynote. He went on stage 20 minutes later, visibly shaken. Someone in the crowd told me he skipped the speech entirely and offered only a 5-sentence closing remark about thanking those who serve. No specifics. No emotion. Just a man trying to sweep dust under a rug made of granite. But the media didn't let it go. Later that night, Bloomberg published a headline. Colonel who saved Titan Equity from collapse revealed as CEO's estranged son. The article spread like wildfire. The reporter I called weeks ago had done her job well, fact-checked, precise, and devastatingly honest. She included quotes from my Pentagon record, a summary of Operation Iron Shield, and, most damning of all, an anonymous source within the company confirming that the Swiss subsidiary had been quietly reopened, against security recommendations. The board was furious. Regulators began sniffing. And for the first time in over 40 years, Gerald Marx wasn't untouchable. But I didn't call him. I didn't send a message. I let the silence speak. A week later, Jonathan tried calling me. I let it ring. Theo emailed me a one-line message, "You made your point." No reply. But then something unexpected happened. Thomas Beringer called. His voice was calm. Even warm. "You handled it better than I ever could have." I didn't know what to say. "You could have destroyed the company," he added. "But you gave it a chance to save face." I replied simply, "I didn't want to destroy Titan Equity." Then I paused. "I just wanted my father to finally see me." Beringer sighed. "He does now." But the story wasn't over. Because poetic justice doesn't stop when the crowd leaves. It happens in what follows, the consequences of ego, the unraveling of pride. One thing my father always taught me, ironically, without meaning to, is that power only protects you until people stop being afraid of you. And after the summit, Gerald Marx wasn't feared anymore. He was exposed. It started slowly. First, whispers in the financial media questioning the judgment of reopening a compromised subsidiary. Then came a leaked internal memo, authored by my brother Jonathan, attempting to paint the cyber breach as a military miscommunication. Yes, you read that right. They tried to blame me. I got a call from my old CO at the Pentagon, chuckling dryly. "They're calling your classified op a PR stunt now." "Seems so. You want us to respond?" "No," I said. "Let them talk. I want to see how far they'll dig their own graves." But behind the scenes, I wasn't idle. I still had the flash drive. Still had every time-stamped file proving Titan Equity's board had reapproved the Swiss server contract, after receiving our warning report from Operation Iron Shield. It was willful negligence, and a national security breach. So I did something bold. I sent the packet directly to 3 people. 1, a financial ethics investigator at the SEC. 2, a senior cybersecurity analyst at Bloomberg. 3, and Thomas Beringer. No words. Just evidence. Let the paper speak louder than the lies. Underscore 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 underscore. Within a week, the board convened an emergency meeting. It was leaked to the press. The headlines flooded in. Titan Equity faces internal shakeup over Swiss data scandal. CEO Gerald Marx accused of ignoring federal cybersecurity warnings. Anonymous whistleblower provides DoD-level intel to regulators. Only I wasn't anonymous. Not anymore. I received a call from Beringer the night before the board's decision. He didn't say much. Just this. Your father called an emergency press conference tomorrow morning. What's he going to do? I asked. What men like him always do when they're cornered. Blame someone else. He did. The next morning, standing in front of the press, Gerald Marx addressed the scandal. Gray-haired, visibly tense, his usual commanding posture faltered. It appears certain cybersecurity recommendations from a prior military operation were not properly escalated, he said. We regret the oversight, and we are conducting an internal review. A reporter interrupted, Are you referring to your son's operation, Colonel Ronald Marx? He hesitated. Just for a moment. Then the lie. Ronald's team acted without fully understanding our corporate structure. Their suggestions, while well-intentioned, lacked critical context. I didn't need to hear more. It was textbook Gerald. When threatened, rewrite the story. Protect the throne. But what he didn't know. The board had already turned on him. Later that day, Beringer sent me the final blow. A private video recording of the board meeting. There, in a dark paneled room, Gerald sat at the head of the table, flanked by Jonathan and Theo. The tension was palpable. Then one board member, an older woman I recognized from past stockholder meetings, stood and said. Gerald, we've reviewed the intel. The warnings were sent. You overrode them. And your son signed off. This company nearly collapsed under your watch. We're voting for immediate resignation. Effective today. He rose, furious. You can't do this. I built Titan Equity. Thomas Beringer stood calmly. And now you'll watch it survive, without you. The vote passed. Unanimous. Even Jonathan abstained. Theo was pale, speechless. Just like that, Gerald Marx, the man who once mocked me for playing soldier, was publicly removed from the very empire he built. And I hadn't even raised my voice. Later that week, I received a letter. Handwritten. Sloppy, like the pen trembled in his grip. Ronald. You've made your point. Enjoy your victory. G. No apology. Just ego in retreat. But I smiled anyway. Because it wasn't about victory. It was about truth. And truth had finally shattered the illusion he spent his life building. But what happened next? That surprised even me. Because justice is one thing. Redemption, that's another story entirely. And sometimes it starts, when someone unexpected extends a hand. After the board vote, my father vanished from the public eye. No more interviews. No press statements. No LinkedIn updates. Gerald Marx, the man who once couldn't finish a meal without bragging about Titan Equity, went silent. And for a while, so did I. The war was over. But I wasn't celebrating. I was, still processing. Because when someone's voice has haunted your life for decades, their silence is unsettling. Not peaceful. Not satisfying. Just, quiet. Layla and I returned to Colorado Springs. She greeted me at the airport with our son, Jordan, who ran into my arms like I'd just returned from a battlefield. In some ways, I had. That night, she held my face in her hands and asked, "Did you get what you needed?" I stared at her. And I answered honestly, not what I thought I needed. But maybe, what I actually did. I had spent so long trying to prove myself to a man who never saw me, I didn't realize I'd become visible to the world in the process. The Department of Defense offered me a senior advisory role on the National Cybersecurity Task Force. Universities began requesting lectures. My story went semi-viral in defense circles, the colonel who saved Wall Street, and fired his father without saying a word. But none of that mattered as much as what came next. One morning, about 6 months after the summit, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it ring. Voicemail picked up. Then, curiosity won. I hit play. Ronald. It's me. Your father. I don't expect forgiveness. And I won't insult you by asking for it. But I read something recently. It was an article about fathers who confuse legacy with control. And I realized. I never taught you anything. You taught me. I thought power was something you had to guard with blood and threats. But you showed me it's something you earned through service. I lost everything I built. But I see now, you built something I never could. If you ever want to talk, man to man, I'm here. He left his number. I didn't call back right away. But I didn't delete it either. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at West Point. They were holding a symposium on military leadership and cybersecurity strategy. I stood at the podium, looking out over hundreds of cadets, their faces so full of hope and purpose. Just like mine once was. I told them what no one had told me. You may not be seen by your family. You may not be understood. But if your mission is rooted in truth, the world will feel your impact whether they ever say your name or not. After the applause, a young cadet approached me. He looked nervous. Sir, he said, I joined the army because of your story. My dad said I'd fail, but now I know I won't. I felt something crack in my chest. Not pain. Not anger. Release. That night, I finally called the number my father had left. He answered on the second ring. His voice was slower. Softer. Older. Ronald? Yeah. It's me. We didn't talk about the board. Or the press. Or even Titan equity. We talked about Mom. About her garden. About the day I left for West Point. And for the first time, my father didn't offer excuses. He just listened. And then said, I was wrong. About everything. I said nothing at first. Then, I know. In the months that followed, we spoke occasionally. Never forced. Just simple exchanges. He began volunteering with a veterans finance program, teaching former soldiers how to build wealth the right way. Jonathan moved to Seattle to start a consulting firm. He finally admitted he was burned out. Theo disappeared into a digital nomad life in Spain. I didn't hear from him again. But that's okay. Because not every relationship needs to be rebuilt. Only the ones worth saving. Now, I spend my days teaching young officers. Advising on digital warfare policy. Coaching my son's baseball team. And writing, something I never thought I'd enjoy. My memoir comes out next spring. The title? The Quietest Voice in the Room. Because that's what I became. And what my father never was. And in that silence, I found myself. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.